Hello and welcome to the Imprint Weekly Podcast. I'm John Kelly, Senior Editor of the Imprint, a daily news site covering child welfare and youth justice around the country. You can read all of our coverage at imprintnews.org or check us out on Facebook or Twitter at the Imprint News. You can sign up on our homepage for our free weekly and monthly newsletters. And for professionals in child welfare and youth justice, subscribe to our Youth Services Insider section for a closer look at news on business policy and practice. The Imprint Weekly Podcast is also a member of the Safe Camp Audio Network. Check out our show page and all of Safe Camp's other great podcasts at safecampaudio.org on the web or Safe Camp Audio on all social media. On today's episode, we are going to do the first of a few guest interviews over the course of the summer that I'm going to nominally refer to as Rule-a-Palooza. So we have discussed a few times on the show the fact that the Biden administration has been pretty active in terms of making new rules and regulations in the child welfare space over the past year or so. But I want listeners to hear from actual subject matter experts on all of these topics, as they have the potential, not for sure, but potential for all of these to, have pretty significant impact on how, both states and counties and local governments operate child welfare systems. So in these episodes, we'll have one expert each on and be a bit more formulaic than our standard interviews to create kind of concise 101 style segments where you can see, a couple of things concretely, what the problem is that the rule or regulation proposes to tackle, the substance of the rule change, right? What actually is changing or being, made clear in the policy, what the next steps are. So what are people who are advocating for the change or who are experts in this field doing about it to get the word out or educate people? And then how will we know if what the Biden administration did actually had an impact in, say, 5 or 10 years? So we'll start that today with one that became final over the fall, and it relates to how relatives and other close kin are licensed and financially supported when foster youth are placed in their homes. And joining us to talk about that is Anna Beltran, who is an attorney for Generations United and the director of the Grand Families and Kinship Support Network, which is housed at Generations United. Anna has been working on this issue in child welfare for decades. So without further ado, here is the first installment of Rule-a-Palooza, Anna Beltran, on the new rules on kinship licensing and financial support.
All right, we are doing a series of guest interviews on all of the new Biden administration rules that have come out or might come out soon. And today we are lucky to have Anna Beltran, director of the Grand Families and Kinship Support Network at Generations United, to help us break down one that has actually been final since the fall of 2023 on the licensing and approval process for relatives and other kinship foster homes. Anna, thank you for joining us on the Imprint Weekly Podcast.
Thank you for having me, John. Thrilled to be with you.
So before we get started trying to break this bad boy down for everybody, house rules here at the Imprint Weekly Podcast, you got to let them know something about yourself. So Anna, I will give you the categories. You got to give me at least one favorite. You can go crazy. One person actually did all 5 of these, but here you go. TV or movie, book, musical group, or sports team. Anna, what do you have for the people?
Oh, I've got a movie. It's Charade from a long time ago with
Charade?
Grant and Audrey Hepburn. And the first time you've see it is the best time you see it because it's quite twisty and you're going to remember the twist. So you want to really, get your popcorn ready and sit down and take it seriously.
Charade, a classic. I'll have to check that out. I haven't done that one. Okay, so this rule is entitled, it's very wonky, as most administrative things are, separate licensing or approval standards for relative or kinship foster family homes. And of course, I will include a link to the rule and to some of our coverage in the imprint about this. We'll also include a 2-pager that Generations United has come up with that explains this pretty well as well. For our conversation today and the rest of these rule episodes, I'm going to just try to keep it a little more formulaic than on our usual episodes so that these are really easy to just rip through and get a basic understanding of what has happened. So no idea what order I'll put these in when they come out, but Anna is my guinea pig because we're doing this. She's the first one to come on and do one of these. So let's see how it goes. I've broken it into kind of 4 parts Part one, what is the problem that the rule seeks to solve, and what was the status quo beforehand?
Thank you so much, John. Important question. So before this final rule, for relatives to serve as foster parents to their kin, they had to meet the same licensing standards as all foster parents. So it didn't make sense for them in many cases. They weren't common sense and tailored to their needs. They were designed for just, your average foster parent out there who's has a very important role to play, but isn't known to the child, isn't connected to the family, isn't known to the community in which that child lives. So, under this backdrop, a lot of states and tribes and territories did not license the relatives. So they tapped the relatives. They said, hey, you relative, will you serve as a placement for this child who's in our legal custody? But, oh, well, I guess we can't fully license or approve you. And that happens for a variety of reasons, some good, some bad. I guess not any really good, but some neutral. And
Well, I think
so,
it's some relatives just don't want to be licensed. They don't want to go through that process, right? For being
yeah,
fair,
that's,
there is
yeah,
some
that's,
group of those. Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of the neutral reason. But, but then these kids would find themselves caring for children who are in illegal custody, who are,
Mhm.
who are children in foster care, subject to all the rules and restrictions of the foster care system, but not getting monthly payments. So, and they weren't getting the monthly payments
Right.
because they weren't licensed. So this led to a lot of inequity, still does. So the same child who would be, if that child was with a non-kin, would be getting foster care maintenance payments, would be getting ongoing financial support, but because they're with the kin, they're not. And so those families that where the children are with kin tend to be disproportionately Black and Indigenous, and they weren't equitably supported. So why should the same child in one home be treated differently than the same child in another home? So that's what this rule addresses. This rule says no more of that. We're going to let you, states, tribes, and territories create common sense, tailored foster care licensing standards for kin, tailored to their needs, tailored to their circumstances. And then you can fully license them and fully approve them under this and pay them the full foster care payment rate that's got to be the same for that child who's with a non-relative, non-kin.
Okay. So you definitely tipped into part two there, and I want to click in a little closer on this. So, just for in layman's terms here,
Mhm.
go into some of the specific things that actually change here as
Yeah,
part of this rule. As you alluded to, one of them is simply making clear to states that there can be two different ways in which they license and approve, right? Based on,
that's
I don't want to
right.
call it strangers, but non-relative, non-kin foster, and then the others. So go ahead with it.
Yeah, that's what's changed, is that what's known as a Title IV Child Welfare Agency. So it's not just states, it's DC, it's Title IV tribes, it's lots of jurisdictions can have separate standards, licensing standards for kin that are common sense and tailored to their needs and their strengths, so that way they can become fully licensed and approved, so that they can get those ongoing foster care maintenance payments, which are so important to help meet the needs of these children. And then the families who are tend to be Black, Indigenous, or in underserved rural areas are going to be equitably supported. So we're not going to have this situation, hopefully, of children in unlicensed foster care with relatives where they're not getting support, but they're subject to all these rules and restrictions of the Child Welfare Agency.
And then what does this rule specifically have to say about that payment? Because I do think right on it goes beyond just saying go ahead and have two processes for approval. It also makes something clear about that, correct?
It sure does. It requires equal payment. So the same child who's with a non-kin and a kin would need to get the same payment. And it requires. So the having the separate standards is an option that states, tribes, and territories can take, but they're very interested in doing it. But the money, the financial support is a requirement. So if you license and approve relatives, you've got to pay them the same as non.
And I don't want to get too sidetracked on this, but I was curious for your thoughts on it because I know that we spoke to you at the time this happened. But there was a court case in one of the U.S. districts that kind of got to this issue. I want to say, man, it must have been like 7 years ago now. It's called Gleason I'll post a link if anybody really wants to geek out and read about this stuff. But basically, it kind of like took place in Kentucky. And if I'm remembering this right, the court kind of made clear, like, look, if you're going to approve but not license these kin that you're relying on, you're going to have to pay them equally. So I guess as I read the rule, I was thinking, is this essentially taking sort of that finding from that circuit and like sort of making it the rule of the land? It's not a law, so the rule of the land, or is that not exactly apples to apples?
No, I mean, I think that's a fair way of looking at it, John. That if a state has whatever process they go through to put children in with their kin, and the child is in the child welfare custody, that then they should pay that child. What's different here is that it's federal money. So that what they're saying now is this federal money will be available
Hmm.
if you do this, and you have to follow the federal requirements. So Kentucky wasn't exactly, well, we won't get into all that, but anyway, so they have to fingerprint the kin and do the Adam Walsh criminal and child abuse registry checks to make sure that they haven't been convicted of a violent felony, or convicted of a drug-related felony within the last 5 years, or certain types of assaults and batteries within the last 5 years.
Right. I'm glad you brought that up because I think there might be somebody listening to this and thinking, well, isn't a lot of what we do to approve foster parents to make sure they're not like criminals or somebody we don't want kids with? That is not exactly what we're talking about here. There is a requirement to do the checks on the safety of the people. We're more talking about the conditions of the home and things like that, right?
Yes. So the new rule, the federal, what the feds have said is you can have these separate licensing standards or approval standards or whatever you call them in your jurisdiction for kin, but you must adhere to federal requirements. And the federal requirements are pretty streamlined and clear, and that is those criminal background checks for felony convictions, those child abuse registry checks for felony convictions, and then you must follow a recommended standards of national organizations. And so that's where a lot of us partners, a lot of national organizations, kinship caregivers, state and tribal and territorial agencies around the country came together and created a model kin specific approval standards. So there is a model out there that can be followed.
The National Association of Counsel for Children advances children's and parents' rights by supporting a diverse, inclusive community of child welfare lawyers to provide zealous legal representation, and by advocating for equitable anti-racist solutions co-designed by people with lived experience. Learn more at naccchildlaw.org, counselforkids.org, and at our National Child Welfare Law Conference this August.
So what's being done now? I mean, I know just come from my own internal conversations, there's a lot of organizing at the national level here to try and push states to kind of take this up, right? Like it's not the rule is important, but it's really only as important as how it's made use of by these states, right? So like what is the next phase for you all in terms of, drawing up engagement and getting people to really kind of make use of this?
Yeah, great question. So we're seeing great movement. When the rule was first published as a notice of proposed rulemaking, it got just hundreds of very positive comments, including from many, many state and territorial and tribal child welfare agencies saying, yes, 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 we really do want the power to have separate, different, tailored licensing standards for relatives than for non-relatives. So they were really excited and chomping at the bit to get going. So when it became final and we had these kin-specific foster home approval standards to roll out, when I say we, it's a lot of national organizations, including Generations United, our Grand Families and Kinship Support Network here at Generations United, which is the first ever federally funded technical assistance center on the families. Think of us, American Bar Association, Center on Children and the Law, NARA, just a lot of national partners came together with caregivers and with agencies and came up with those kin-specific approval standards. and they are rolling out. We are providing assistance to them. Those standards have tools like caregiver assessments. Safety is still paramount, of course. But these standards consider the needs of these families and, what they look like, and they're known to the children. So it's a different population than your average foster parent. So that's what they take into consideration. And we're seeing movement. We're seeing the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community was the very first jurisdiction to get approved to implement the final rule and have a separate standards for kin and a separate process for kin. So they're well on their way. And the first state was Michigan to be approved. And now Nebraska, Nevada, and Tennessee have joined them. So there is a lot of fast movement given that this rule just went final 6 months ago.
Yeah, that's incredible pace. And so I think you touched on something also that's not entirely clear until you realize it. The way the sort of the bi-directional way this works is the administration said it's now okay for you to have two different paths. But it wasn't like go forth and make up your own and then you're good. You do have to submit it to the administration or whoever comes next, right, to review and make sure that they are good with it as an alternative path. That's when you're saying Michigan got accepted, Salt Pima got accepted. That's what you're talking about. They've been reviewed by.
Thank you, John. Yeah, really important point. Yes, absolutely. Because federal money is involved, they must submit an amended what's called a Title 4E plan, which is basically that pot of money that allows them to, that pot of money that allows them to make these payments to kin. So submit an amended plan and get it approved. And so the federal government's moving fast too. So not only the state's moving fast, the feds are moving fast.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, honestly, all my years of doing this, which is 25 plus, to see 5 jurisdictions approved in 6 months, that's kudos to all of them, the feds and those jurisdictions. So
yeah, my eye keeps going to this photo behind because it's just such a great picture. I'm guessing of a granddaughter and grandfather just looking at each other adoringly. It's very cool.
Yeah, I like these pictures too.
Yeah. Okay, last question. This is a big one. How will we know if this rule had an impact in 5 years? If we're looking back 5 years, what would you consider the evidence of success? How are you going to measure the impact of this thing?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. I would say, and this is honest speaking, but that a higher percentage of children who are in foster care are placed with kin. So not that there are more children in foster care, but that the children that are in foster care, that number, that more of them are placed with kin, and that those kin are licensed, approved, fully supported, and so that the bottom line is children are equitably supported. So a child who's in foster care, regardless of whether they're placed, are being supported in that placement. And so that is really going to address the inequities that we have seen among how white children are treated in foster care versus Black versus Indigenous versus urban, which is rural. Really make sure that all of these children, no matter who cares for them, no matter what they look like, no matter their circumstances, are getting support.
Yeah, I think that's right. I would maybe add the coda, and this isn't a tough thing. I know you're going to probably agree with me. There's sort of like this other layer of foster care that maybe doesn't always show up officially. Some people call hidden foster care or shadow foster care or diversion, where, it's often kin that are getting the kids, but they're getting them with just physical custody and not the legal custody. And it seems like in order to truly measure everything that's happening post this rule, we maybe have to get a better handle on counting that, which I think some states are kind of maybe starting to do, but a lot aren't, right? It's a sticky one.
Yeah, well, the federal reporting requirements doesn't require them to count them. So they're not required to give those numbers through what's known as the AFGAR system.
Yeah.
But you're right, more and more jurisdictions are counting those children. And what we at Generations United and the network believe is that relatives should be given all of their options, right? And they are the experts in their family. So if they don't want to care for these children in foster care, just make sure that they are fully informed of what that means, what the consequences are, that it's going to be them versus parent in the courthouse, as opposed to child welfare agency versus parent in the courthouse, etc. all these considerations are really important, and Ken should be able to make those decisions, or at least make that fully informed decision with all their options presented to them, because they're the experts in their families.
Yeah, I think that's right. You said it really well there. All right, Anna Beltran, Director of Grand Families and Kinship Support Network for Generations United, thank you for joining us on the Imprint Weekly Podcast.
Thank you, John. What a pleasure.
Thanks to Anna Beltran of Generations United for joining us today. The Imprint Weekly Podcast is a production of the Safe Camp Audio Network, which is a division of Fostering Media Connections. Please visit safecampaudio.org on the web or at safecampaudio on all major social media. This podcast is produced and mixed by Christine Anjoko, with music by Luke Giroux and Cyrus Elia. If you enjoyed this episode, we would love it if you'd consider subscribing or giving us a 5-star rating on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you download your podcasts. And we would greatly appreciate if you would consider supporting our work here on the podcast and in print. Small donations from our listeners and readers go a long way towards helping us grow and cover more great stories in child welfare and youth justice. To support us, it is super easy. Just visit imprintnews.org/donate. You can follow the Imprint on Twitter and Facebook by searching the handle @theImprintNews and visit us on the web at imprintnews.org. You can get us on email at tips@imprintnews.org. I'm John Kelly, and we'll see you next week.